You have seen it even if you never thought about it. You drive past a rail yard late at night and there they are, a line of locomotives parked going nowhere, nobody aboard. And every single one of them is running, idling, rumbling away in the dark, burning fuel, doing absolutely nothing for hours, sometimes for days. Your first thought is the obvious one. What a waste, shut them off. You would never leave your car running all night in a parking lot. So why does a machine that burns thousands of gallons of diesel sit there idling until sunrise with not a soul in the cab? Turns out there are real reasons, good ones, and the railroads hate every single one of them because that idling is costing them a fortune. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We want to know who's out there. Start with the cold, because that is the big one. A diesel locomotive does not cool its engine with antifreeze the way your car does. It uses plain water with a treatment mixed in, and there is a reason for that. A big road locomotive holds something like 300 gallons of coolant. If that were antifreeze and a line ever let go, you would have hundreds of gallons of toxic glycol dumped straight onto the ground and into the water table. So the railroad said no. Just water. Cheap, clean, easy. But water has one fatal flaw. It freezes, and a steel engine block full of frozen water does not just stop working, it cracks. The ice expands and splits the block wide open, and now you are looking at a repair bill in the tens of thousands of dollars for one engine. Multiply that across a yard full of locomotives in a January cold snap, and you are talking about millions. So when the temperature drops, the railroads have a simple choice. Keep the engine running so the moving warm coolant never freezes, or shut it down and gamble the block does not crack. They keep it running. Every time. Some locomotives even have a valve under the frame. The old hands call it the Ogance valve, that automatically dumps all the cooling water onto the ground if the engine shuts down and starts getting too cold, just to save the block. The machine would rather bleed out its own coolant than freeze to death. Now the second reason, starting one of these things is nothing like turning a key. A modern diesel locomotive engine is a monster. 16 cylinders, thousands of horsepower, weighing more than a school bus all by itself. You do not just crank it and go. Before it can fire, the oil has to be pumped through the whole engine to lubricate it, a process called pre-lubrication, because if you spin that engine dry even once you destroy the bearings, the starting system has to turn over an enormous mass of cold steel. The locomotive carries 8 batteries, each one weighing over 300 pounds, 6 volts of muscle stacked up just to have enough power to crank that engine over. And every single cold start puts hard wear on those batteries, the starter motor, and the contactors that carry the current. It gets harder in the cold. When the temperature drops, the diesel fuel itself starts to thicken. Push it cold enough and the fuel gels, turning waxy and refusing to flow through the lines at all. A locomotive with gelled fuel is going nowhere no matter how good the batteries are. The oil thickens too, so the starter has to fight even harder to turn the engine. Everything that is already difficult about starting one of these machines gets worse the colder it gets, which is exactly when you most need it to start. There is a hard limit to how many times you can shut down and restart one of these engines in a day before you start wearing out the starting system itself. And here is the thing the railroads fear most. A locomotive that will not restart out on the road is not an inconvenience. It is a road failure. It blocks the main line. It strands a train and every train behind it. It costs the railroad far more than the fuel it would have burned just idling. So the crews learned the lesson a long time ago. If it is going to sit for less than a few hours, you leave it running. It is faster, cheaper, and safer than gambling on a restart. Then there is the AIR. This one most people never think about. A train does not stop with the engine. It stops with AIR brakes, a system running the entire length of the train, every car connected by hoses, all held under pressure. That pressure comes from a compressor driven by the running engine. When the locomotive sits, that air slowly leaks out of the system, a little at every joint and every fitting, all the way down the train. You have heard it, that loud hiss under a parked train. That is the sound of air escaping. If you shut the engine down, the air bleeds away completely, and before that train can move again, you have to build all that pressure back up from zero, charging it car by car down the entire length of the consist. On a freight train over a mile long, that is not a quick job. It can take a long time, and the railroad does not pay anybody to stand around waiting on air. Keep the engine running, keep the air up, and the train is ready to roll the moment the crew is. And the engine is doing other quiet work while it idles. It is charging those big batteries. It is keeping the electronics alive. It is keeping the cab warm or cool for the crew. Shut it down and all of that stops too. So now you understand why they idle. Cold that cracks the block. A start that wears out the machine and risks stranding a train. AR pressure that takes forever to rebuild. It all adds up to one answer: leave it running. But here is the part that makes this a real story. The railroads know exactly how much this is costing them, down to the penny, and the number is staggering. Run the math on a single Class 1 railroad. Say it burns 500 million gallons of diesel a year across 4,000 locomotives. Now say each one idles just 4 hours a day when it did not strictly have to, burning about 3.5 gallons an hour. That works out to over 20 million gallons of fuel a year burned for nothing. 20 million gallons. That is more than 4% of everything the railroad burns, going straight up the stack while the locomotive sits still. At $2 a gallon, that is $40 million a year. Gone. Every year. So the railroads have spent decades fighting their own machines. They invented systems with names like Smart Start and AESS, automatic engine start-stop, computers that monitor the engine temperature, the battery charge, the air pressure, and shut the diesel down the second it is safe, then automatically fire it back up before anything freezes or drains. The savings are real, as much as $15,000 a year for every single locomotive they put it on. They bolted on auxiliary power units, little engines that sip a quarter gallon an hour to do the warming, and charging the big engine was wasting fuel to do. They ran power lines out to yards so units could plug in like an electric car instead of idling. And still, on a cold night, you will drive past that yard and hear them. The whole row of them rumbling in the dark, nobody aboard, burning money by the minute. Because for all the computers and all the clever fixes, the oldest truth on the railroad still wins on the coldest nights. The machine is easier to keep alive than it is to bring back from the dead. That is why they never turn off. Not because anyone forgot to flip the switch, but because shutting one down in the wrong weather at the wrong time can cost you far more than the fuel ever will. The locomotive idles all night for the same reason a campfire gets banked instead of put out, because starting over from cold and dark is the hardest thing of all.